It's just past 7 a.m. on a cloudy Monday in Southfield, Michigan, the kind of morning where the air feels heavier than it should, and the sky hangs low like it's not sure whether to rain or just sulk. Millie's Diner, tucked between a locksmith shop and an old laundromat on Jefferson Street, hums to life with the clinking of coffee cups, the crackle of bacon on the grill, and the low shuffle of regulars sliding into booths they've claimed for years. It's not fancy. The stools are torn in places, the blinds rattle when the wind blows, and the specials board hasn't changed in weeks. But people don't come for the decor. They come because it feels like home. Raymond Cole is already there, like always. Same booth by the window, back to the wall, coat still buttoned despite the heat inside. His army jacket, olive green, patched at the elbow, frayed at the collar, says everything without needing to shout. It's the kind of coat you keep, not because it's warm, but because it remembers. Raymond orders the same thing every week. Millie doesn't even ask. Hash browns, rye toast, black coffee, no sugar, no small talk, no fuss. He reads the Detroit Free Press, folds it neatly when he's done, and tips in exact bills. There's a kind of rhythm to him, like the way the clock ticks over the coffee maker. Steady, quiet, familiar. Becca, the young waitress with the braided bun and permanent Sharpie stains on her hands, always calls him Mr. Cole. She knows better than to ask too much, but she notices things, like how he always wipes his hands before touching the sugar holder, even though he never uses it, or how he glances toward the door every time it opens, not with fear, just memory. Millie, the owner, watches him too. She lost her husband years ago in a deployment she doesn't talk about, and though Raymond never said it, she knows he served. There's a quiet between them that feels like respect. To most folks passing by, Raymond looks like someone the world forgot. Old coat, worn shoes, no car out front. But in this little diner, he's not invisible. He's part of the place. The kind you don't see until you need someone who knows how to stand still when things get loud. The morning rush had just started to trickle in when the bell over the diner door jangled a little too hard. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside like they owned the place. Officer Trey Maddox was first. Tall and broad-shouldered with mirrored sunglasses still on, despite the dim lighting inside. His partner, Officer Kyle Crowley, followed close behind, shorter, with a notebook already in hand, and the kind of silence that made it hard to tell if he was thinking or just didn't care. Becca glanced up from the coffee station and gave them a polite nod. "Morning, officers," she offered, but neither one returned it. Trey scanned the room quickly, his gaze settling almost immediately on Raymond. It was like he didn't see anyone else. "Sir," he said as he approached the booth, "are you a paying customer here?" Raymond looked up, blinked once and nodded. "Yes, I am." "You buy something?" Trey asked, stepping a little closer. "Breakfast is on the way," Raymond replied calmly. Crowley flipped open his notebook. "You have a receipt?" Raymond raised an eyebrow, but before he could answer, Becca spoke up. "I just took his order," she said. "He's a regular." Trey didn't even glance at her. "Did I ask you?" Millie had heard the tone from the kitchen. She wiped her hands and stepped through the swinging door, voice steady. "That man's been coming here every Monday for years. Paid in cash, same as always." Trey finally looked her way. "We got a call," he said flatly. "A report of a suspicious individual hanging around the premises. Matches this gentleman's description." "From who?" Millie asked. Trey didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to Raymond. "I'm going to need to see some ID." Raymond didn't argue. He reached slowly into his inner coat pocket and pulled out an old leather wallet. It creaked slightly as he opened it and slid out a faded federal ID card. The corners were worn, but the seal and name were clear. Crowley glanced at it, then smirked. "This all you got?" Raymond nodded once. "It's all I need." Trey's jaw tightened. "Step outside with us, sir. We just want to ask a few questions." "You can ask them here," Raymond replied, his voice even. "I'm not disturbing anyone," A young couple 2 booths over looked down at their plates. A delivery driver near the counter shuffled awkwardly. Nobody said anything, but the energy in the diner shifted. Trey leaned forward, voice lower now. "You homeless?" Raymond answered without hesitation. I don't have a house, but I have a home in this town." Crowley let out a short laugh, scribbling something down. "Real cute. How long you been sitting here?" "About 20 minutes, Raymond replied. "And how long you planning on staying?" "Long enough to eat my breakfast." Millie stepped closer. He's not bothering anyone. If you've got something official, say it. If not, let him finish his meal." Trey didn't move. His hand hovered just above his belt, like he was waiting for an excuse. Crowley kept writing. Becca stood still behind the counter, one hand gripping a coffee pot, the other clenched at her side. The air felt heavier than it had an hour ago. Something was shifting, and everyone in that little diner could feel it. Raymond didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't ask why they were singling him out when half the booths had customers who hadn't ordered yet or were still nursing a single cup of coffee. Instead, he reached down beside his plate, opened his old military coat just enough to reach the inside pocket, and pulled out a beat-up flip phone. The kind you don't see much anymore, unless someone really doesn't want to be found. He flipped it open with one hand, pressed a single button, then held it to his ear. "It's happening again," he said quietly, almost like he was talking to himself. Then he closed the phone and laid it gently on the table next to his untouched coffee. For a second, everything in the diner paused. The spatula on the grill, the tapping on Crowley's notepad, even the couple 2 booths down stopped mid-bite. Trey squinted. "Who'd you just call?" Raymond didn't answer. He just looked back at him, calm and still. Trey shifted his stance, clearly thrown off by the simplicity of it. "Sir, I asked you a question," he said, louder this time. But Raymond stayed quiet. He wasn't being rude, he wasn't being hostile. He was being deliberate. Like he'd been through something like this before and knew exactly how it played out. Millie's eyes darted from the phone to Raymond's face, then back to the officers. She'd seen a lot of things behind that counter. Drunks, fights, arguments over unpaid checks. But nothing like this. Becca's hand was still clenched around the coffee pot, but now her eyes were locked on Raymond's. Something about the way he sat there, so composed in the middle of rising tension, made her chest tighten. Trey looked at Crowley, then back at Raymond. "If that was supposed to scare us, it didn't," he muttered. Raymond finally spoke. "It wasn't meant to." And just like that, the quiet in the room turned sharp, like everyone was holding their breath without knowing why. Trey's jaw tightened, as if he'd just been challenged. Maybe it was the calm in Raymond's voice. Maybe it was the quiet in the diner. But something about it made him itch to reassert control. He took one step forward, hand resting on the handle of his cuffs. "That's it," he said flatly. "Stand up, sir. You're coming outside with us." Raymond didn't move. He didn't even blink. He just sat there, like the booth was his anchor and the air hadn't shifted one bit. "On what charge?" he asked, voice still low. "We just want to talk," Trey replied. But his fingers were already curling around the metal. "Then talk," Raymond said. "I'm not leaving my breakfast." Millie stepped forward quickly, wiping her hands on her apron. "He hasn't done anything. You've got no reason." "Ma'am, I suggest you step back unless you want to be charged with obstruction," Trey snapped. That got everyone's attention. A fork clinked loudly against a plate somewhere. Becca moved from behind the counter, but her legs felt heavy. She looked at Raymond, who still hadn't raised his voice, hadn't stood up, hadn't so much as shifted his shoulders. He just watched Trey, with the kind of gaze that didn't waver even when someone tried to intimidate him. Crowley hovered nearby, silent, uneasy. It was clear he didn't like the way things were going, but he didn't stop it either. Trey leaned in, his cuffs halfway out, when a chair scraped against the linoleum. Then another. An older man in a camouflage jacket stood up from his booth across the room. His voice was steady. "He's not alone." Trey turned, confused. Then a woman in her 60s stood beside him, her teacher's ID still clipped to her sweater. "I've known that man since I moved here. He's no threat." Two more people rose, quietly but firmly. A delivery guy by the door shifted his box to the side and crossed his arms. A young mother with a stroller didn't stand, but she spoke clearly. "If this is how you treat someone just trying to eat, what does that say about you?" The room wasn't loud. There were no chants, no shouting, just presence. A silent, unified line of resistance drawn with coffee cups and creased brows. Trey looked around, suddenly aware of how many eyes were on him, how many phones had come out from under tables and jackets. For the first time that morning, he hesitated. Raymond finally stood up. Not rushed, not defensive, just tall. And when he did, he seemed bigger than anyone remembered. Not because of his size, but because of what he carried. He looked Trey directly in the eyes. "You're making a scene," he said softly. Trey opened his mouth like he wanted to push back, but the weight of the room pressed down on him before he could speak. Crowley finally cleared his throat, barely audible. "Maybe we take a step back," he muttered. But it was already too late. The diner had chosen, and they hadn't chosen the badge. The bell above the diner door slammed against the wood frame as it swung open hard, but no one turned right away. They were all too focused on Raymond and the two officers frozen in a standoff that had gone from quiet to dangerous in less than a minute. But then a voice cut through the tension, like a wire snapping. "Officers Maddox and Crowley, do not move." The voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Sharp, commanding, practiced. Everyone turned. A man in a navy blue overcoat stepped into the room. Trim, mid-40s, crisp white shirt, polished shoes, and a small leather badge case already in his hand. He didn't flash it like a movie cop. He just held it up and walked forward like he belonged wherever he was. "Michael Sterling," he said, his tone calm and official. "Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division." Trey blinked. "This isn't your jurisdiction." "Actually," Sterling replied, without slowing his stride, "it became my jurisdiction the second you violated this man's civil liberties on a public frequency." He stopped next to Raymond's booth, nodding at him. "Sir." Raymond gave a small nod back, but didn't speak. "We monitor specific language on open radio lines," Sterling continued, turning toward the officers now. "And when I heard the phrase uncooperative suspicious male, no fixed address, I got in my car." He turned to the room. "Is there anyone here who can confirm Mr. Cole's behavior was disruptive in any way?" No one answered. Millie stepped forward. He was sitting right there, quiet, waiting for his breakfast. Becca nodded. He didn't raise his voice, didn't do anything wrong. The man in the camo jacket spoke up. They were the ones causing trouble. Sterling looked back to Trey. "Your body camera's on, correct?" Trey stiffened. "Of course it is." "Good," Sterling said, "because what I just walked into is not only an abuse of authority, it's a liability." Crowley shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at his shoes. "With all due respect, sir, we were responding to a complaint." "Filed by who?" Sterling asked. "No name? No contact?" He paused. "You got nothing, and you pushed it anyway." Trey's face was red now, lips tight, breathing just a little too fast. "I'm going to need both of your badge numbers now." He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. But something in his voice made it clear that this was no longer a request. Slowly, Trey reached into his vest and pulled out his ID. Crowley followed. Sterling didn't take them. He just noted the numbers and looked back at Raymond. "You all right?" Raymond nodded once. "Didn't want to call you?" "But you were right to," Sterling said. Then he turned to the rest of the diner. "I apologize for the disruption. This will be handled." Trey and Crowley stood awkwardly for another few seconds, but they didn't say a word as they turned and walked out the door. And for the first time all morning, the diner exhaled. By the time the door shut behind the two officers, the room had gone from thick with tension to buzzing with a strange kind of quiet energy. People weren't speaking, but they were exchanging looks, shocked, confused, relieved. Becca let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, and leaned against the counter like her knees had finally gone soft. Millie walked over and poured Raymond a fresh cup of coffee without saying a word. Raymond gave her a small nod and wrapped his hands around the warm mug. Michael Sterling stayed standing next to the booth, his expression unreadable. His phone buzzed once. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and exhaled. "Well," he said almost to himself, "that didn't take long." He turned the phone around and showed Raymond the screen. It was already on social media, less than 20 minutes after the officers had walked in. Someone had recorded the whole thing, from the moment Trey started raising his voice to the second Sterling demanded their badge numbers. The video was climbing in views by the second, comments pouring in. Becca leaned over and caught a glimpse of the post. "That's us," she said quietly. "That's this morning." Sterling nodded. "The internet moves fast when it smells injustice." Millie shook her head. "I didn't even see who filmed it." "Doesn't matter," Sterling replied. "It's out there now, and people are paying attention." Raymond didn't look at the screen. He just stared out the window like the world outside was moving too fast for his liking. "I didn't ask to be a headline," he said finally. "You didn't have to," Sterling said. "They made you one the second they walked in here like you didn't belong." Raymond didn't answer. He took a sip of his coffee, still hot, still bitter the way he liked it. The voices in the diner were returning, low and careful at first, like people testing if the moment had truly passed. But the story was no longer just between those walls. It was moving, spreading, and Raymond Cole, who had come in just to have a quiet breakfast, was suddenly the center of a conversation he never wanted, but maybe one the country needed. Later that day, while the video continued to spread across every corner of the internet, bits and pieces of Raymond Cole's past began surfacing too, but not from him. Raymond didn't post. He didn't tweet or share his side. He just finished his breakfast, thanked Millie, and walked out like he always did. But people were curious now. They wanted to know who the quiet man in the army coat was, the one who never raised his voice but somehow changed the room. It started with a blurry photo, black and white, taken more than 20 years ago. A younger Raymond, dressed in a pressed suit, standing behind a podium with the Department of Justice seal in the background. The caption read, "Raymond Cole, Director of Federal Civil Rights Oversight, 2002. Then came the statements from former colleagues, investigators, and attorneys who had once worked under him. They spoke of long hours, high-stakes cases, and an unwavering sense of right and wrong. One woman, now a judge, shared that it was Raymond who had given her her first break. Another, a civil rights lawyer in Baltimore, said she watched him dismantle a corrupt precinct without ever stepping in front of a camera. People learned that Raymond had once led investigations into excessive force cases in 8 different states, that he'd been the quiet architect behind policy reforms, pushed through not by speeches but by relentless paperwork, field interviews, and holding people accountable. He'd received honors, internal commendations, DOJ recognitions, but he'd turned down most of the ceremonies. He never cared about the spotlight, someone posted. He cared about the people who never got to speak. The more they found, the clearer it became that Raymond Cole wasn't just another older man in a booth with a quiet way about him. He was someone who had spent his life fighting injustice from behind the scenes, and now, years later, long after the titles and the briefings, he was still being tested. And even in that diner, just trying to eat breakfast, he hadn't backed down. He didn't have to. His presence was enough. By the following Monday, Millie's diner was back to its usual morning rhythm. Grill sizzling, cups clinking, local radio murmuring beneath the sound of forks on plates. No reporters outside this time, no badge checks or standoffs. Just regulars, same as always. But something felt different, like everyone was waiting for a moment they couldn't name. Then the bell over the door rang, and Raymond Cole walked in. Same coat, same boots, same calm way of moving, as if nothing had changed at all. But everyone knew better now. He gave Becca a small nod as he passed, and she responded with a smile that said more than words ever could. Millie looked up from behind the counter and pointed to his booth without speaking. It was open. It was always open. But today, before Raymond sat down, he paused, turned around, cleared his throat gently. For a second, no one noticed. Then Becca did. Then Millie. Then the room. The diner fell quiet. Raymond looked at them, at neighbors and strangers and people who'd been sitting just a few feet away when everything happened. And he spoke. "I didn't come here looking for attention," he said. "Didn't plan to be part of anyone's headline. I came in for breakfast. Same as every Monday." A few people nodded. No one said a word. "Some of you knew me, some of you didn't. That's fine. I didn't ask for special treatment. I just wanted a booth, a plate of food, and a little peace. But what happened last week? That wasn't about me. Not really." He glanced at Becca, at Millie, then back to the room. It was about something bigger, about how easy it is to be seen as a problem when you don't fit someone else's picture of who belongs. He paused, letting the words settle. "I wore this jacket in places most people can't pronounce. Watched good men fall beside me. And when I came back, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd earned the right to sit in a diner without being questioned like a criminal." His voice never rose, but it never wavered either. "But that's not the world we live in yet. So we speak, we stand, or sometimes we sit, and let the truth do the talking." The room was still. A few eyes welled up. Others lowered their heads. Millie wiped her hands on her apron a little slower than usual. "I'm not a hero," Raymond said. "I'm a man, one of many, and I hope next time when it's someone else sitting here, you'll remember that." Then, without waiting for applause or nods, he turned back to his booth and finally sat down. Becca brought his usual without asking. Hash browns, rye toast, black coffee, no sugar. And this time, when she placed the plate in front of him, her voice was soft but steady. "Welcome back, Mr. Cole." A few weeks passed, and while the online buzz slowly faded, as it always does, the impact didn't. Raymond's name was no longer trending, but it had reached the right people. At first, it was just a letter, hand-delivered to the diner in a plain envelope. Inside, a formal note from the Department of Justice, offering Raymond a position as an honorary advisor for a new federal initiative on community oversight. It came with no salary, no press expectations, just a quiet desk in a small office near downtown where he could consult if he wished. Raymond didn't say yes right away. He didn't say no either. He just folded the letter carefully, tucked it into his jacket, and finished his coffee. A few days later, 2 young staffers from a local veterans group came to the diner. They shook Raymond's hand and told him that because of his story, donors had stepped up to sponsor housing for retired servicemen who were struggling. "They said it was because you reminded them that dignity has no expiration date," one of them said. Raymond simply nodded and said, "Good, make it count." He didn't want parades or plaques, but slowly things around him began to shift. When he walked into Millie's now, people made room. Not out of pity, but respect. Not because he was famous, but because they understood now. Kids who had once looked through him now greeted him by name. One teenage boy, after finishing his eggs, left a folded napkin on Raymond's table. Inside was a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for sitting still when others didn't." Raymond didn't keep it, but he remembered it. The booth by the window stayed his. The coffee stayed strong. The toast still came a little too dry. But something deeper had changed. One quiet morning, Millie walked over and said, "I heard you accepted that office." Raymond looked up, thoughtful. "Not for me. For the ones who still need someone to listen." She smiled. "That sounds like you." He nodded, then added, "But I told them I'm still here Mondays. That doesn't change." And it didn't. Every Monday, Raymond showed up. Same coat, same meal. He still didn't talk much, still didn't like the spotlight. But when people walked into Millie's and saw him sitting there, they sat a little straighter. They ordered a little kinder. They looked twice before judging someone too fast. Because now they knew. Sometimes the quietest man in the room is the one who's carried the most. One rainy morning, a young man stepped into Millie's diner, soaked and a little lost. He looked around, unsure where to sit, until he saw Raymond Cole in his usual booth, quietly sipping coffee. The young man hesitated, then approached. "Mind if I sit?" Raymond looked up, nodded once, and slid the extra cup across the table. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. But that small moment, an invitation without judgment, a seat without suspicion, was enough. Because that's what Raymond stood for. Dignity without a title, strength without noise, and the understanding that sometimes the greatest act of resistance is to remain steady in a world that tries to shake you. His story reminds us that respect should never be earned through struggle. It should be given through decency. And when you see someone sitting quietly, don't assume they're invisible. They might just be holding the line for all of us. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next powerful story like this one. There's always more to see, if you're willing to really look.